used as a propaganda mechanism. We saw it flatly. I mean, I think it's the smoking gun, quite frankly, of the Obamagate narrative and the Russiagate narrative, that it was so baked in that the New York Times and Washington Post went and ran with it. Some would say that that's part of Operation Mockingbird. Some would say that that's part of what we learned in the Church Committee, that the intel agencies were using media outlets as their mouthpieces, and that those mouthpieces would parrot the official narrative. And I wanted to ask you, is this operation still going on? Are you aware of the intel agencies working directly with media outlets in order to push prescribed narratives that may or may not be true?
It's something that we've already had to deal with, Benny, within this administration, where there are people within the intelligence community who believe that their will is more important than the will of the American people, and will weaponize intelligence by leaking it to their friends within the mainstream media with the intent of undermining President Trump's agenda. It is not one that he hasn't already talked about in every rally and town hall that he did throughout the campaign. I don't even know how many there were, but President Trump is enacting the very thing he promised the American people he would do in this election. So people in the intelligence community, they may agree, they may disagree. That's not the point here. As intelligence professionals, as people who work in the national security space, in the intelligence community, they are required to fulfill their mandate to their oath to the Constitution of the United States and to the President of the United States, who is duly elected by the American people. Those who leak intelligence to their friends in the mainstream media with the intent of undermining the president who was elected by the American people, none of these intelligence professionals were. They are subverting the will of the people and therefore undermining the Constitution.
It's wild that you're still having to deal with that. Call it what you will. But Operation Mockingbird, just incredible that they were just out with it, that they were using the media as government organs to push propaganda, and it's still happening today.
This is why what we're doing is so important, Benny,
Yes.
and this is why President Trump's mandate in this is really critical, is by exposing the truth, by exposing the bad actors within the intelligence community and in the political space who are weaponizing intelligence to advance their own political interests, is so important to be able to turn the light on in places that have been dark for far too long, expose the truth, and drive accountability. That's the only way that we can actually shift this and begin the work to try to restore trust in the intelligence community.
Now, that was Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard on a podcast talking about and confirming something that I talked about pretty much as long as I've been at this station, for almost 10 years now. Something that me and Jonathan Booz used to talk about 8-9 years ago. Operation Mockingbird. Operation Mockingbird. A lot of you have probably heard that, but you don't know exactly what it is. Well, basically, our government, post the Cold War, after the World War II, started to use the media to disseminate its propaganda. And so, while obviously I have my issues with Tulsi Gabbard and obviously the Trump administration, who use propaganda in their own way, you sort of have to sift through the crap to find a gold nugget in there. You have the Director of National Intelligence confirming what I've been saying and what we've been saying, many people have been saying for decades now, which is that our government, our media is a government of the CIA, our media is an arm of our government, when the purpose of the media is to be a check on the government. And so this story really goes back to what I talk about on this show every week, that you should not trust the people on ABC, NBC, CBS, Fox News, MSNBC. These people all work for these same institutions of wealth and power. Now, I actually saw a clip from MSNBC of our former CIA director James Brennan talking about this very topic. This is on MSNBC. Again, you have to sift through the nuggets because they are all propagandists. So you have to listen to what they're saying and sift through it to sort of push back, because the way Tulsi framed it is that, well, these horrible Democrats are out to get Donald Trump and they're using the media to get at him, which is true. That's true. But Donald Trump also uses the media to push propaganda that he wants out there. They all do it. They all are doing it. And it is completely against and antithetical to the principles of the Fourth Estate. There is a reason that we in the media, me talking to you on this microphone right here in this radio studio, we are the only occupation that is protected by the Constitution. No other occupation is protected by the Constitution. That's it. We're the only one. We're the only one. People on radio, TV, newspaper, whatever, there is a reason. Because we are a check on government power. By informing you, that is what we do. And this is what the former propagandist CIA director had to say about it on MSNBC.
And not in the truthful way in which it was given?
I think they see that there is politicization at the top of the intelligence and law enforcement agencies, undermining the credibility of the individuals who lead these organizations. And if it undermines the credibility of those individuals, it undermines the credibility of the institutions themselves. So the U.S. intelligence is the most powerful entity on the globe. So many other countries rely on U.S. intelligence that we feed them this information. But if they suspect that anything is being done for political purposes, they're no longer going to look at this information as objective, as apolitical, as accurate information, which really is a shame, because sometimes we need to have a coalition of the willing, coalition of all our partners and allies. And that intelligence really undergirds a lot of the political efforts underway.
So you just have the former director of the CIA admitting that not only do we propagandize our own population, we propagandize the world. Oh, you just thought it was about America. Oh, no, baby. Nah. We propagandize the entire world. So how did we get to this point, right? How did we get to this point? Operation Mockingbird was a CIA program that was covert, that started in the late 40s after World War II and continued, at least from what they told us, into the 1970s. It was aimed at influencing and manipulating the media for propaganda purposes. In the early years of the Cold War, the U.S. government made efforts to use the media to influence public opinions internationally. Now, how'd they do this? They infiltrated the organizations of the media around the world. They actually had journalists on its payroll, on their payroll. Yes, that's right. The CIA had journalists on their payroll and worked with cooperative media figures to shape the media coverage. Now, this involved major U.S. media outlets, including newspapers, magazines, broadcasts, and networks. They sought to control the narratives especially when we were fighting the Soviet Union in the Cold War. They wanted to counter communist influence. That's why you hear people all over this country talking about communism and socialism. Dude, we are the only country that talks like that. Like, seriously. Obsessed with communism, obsessed with socialism, obsessed with these things. Oh my God, it's the worst thing in the world. You know. Now, I'm not a communist, I'm not a socialist, but I do find it infantile that Europeans, Canadians, people in Latin America, Africa, and everywhere else can think rationally about economic systems, whether it's capitalism, whether it's communism, whether it's socialism, and have a full debate on the merits of each system, the pluses and the minuses, the pros and the cons. But in America, if you say anything other than communism and socialism bad, you're a threat to some sort of national security. And this is what comes from generations of Operation Mockingbird. Project Mockingbird was something totally different. This is Operation Mockingbird. They wanted to influence the foreign media and public perception of the United States in countries that were deemed strategically important. This was a big part of U.S. aid. This is why we use U.S. aid. You saw how angry the liberal media was that Donald Trump was getting rid of U.S. aid. And did you ever look at the list of stuff we were funding, like a form of Sesame Street in South Africa, and we were funding, gay puppet shows in like Latin America somewhere, and all that was so that we can propagate people in different countries. That's what it was. We were propagating. That's all we were doing. Propagating the public in much of the world. And we were using U.S. aid in order to do it. Our government started disinformation campaigns. Yes, our government spread disinformation campaigns all the time. Like when in 1990, when we had the daughter of the ambassador to Kuwait pretend to be a nurse in a hospital when she spoke in front of our Congress about how babies were being thrown off of incubators by Saddam Hussein's forces. That was a bald-faced lie. Even the government admits it was a lie now that nothing can be done about it. She literally got up there and cried in front of Congress and everything so that we would send more money to the military-industrial complex. We would send more money to the military-industrial complex and overthrow Iraq's government. That was before we finally did it in 2003, the first time. This is the first time. But we also used propaganda the second time. Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction, and, we slandered all the military, the UN experts, the weapons experts who wanted to look to make sure that Saddam didn't have them. People like Scott Ritter. We literally tried to destroy his life in multiple ways because he came out and told the truth against the U.S. government. Now, how did we first find out about this? Well, after the U.S. Senate Watergate Committee in 1973 uncovered domestic surveillance abuses directed by the Nixon administration, the New York Times in 1974 published an article from Seymour Hersh, who's still out there doing good work today. He exposed that we blew up the pipeline, the Nord Stream pipeline that we claim Russia blew up. No, that was us. Well, that was Seymour Hersh as well. Seymour Hersh back then found out that the CIA had violated its charter by spying on anti-war activists, former CIA officials, and even some lawmakers. So this came out in what was called the Church Committee. All this came out in the Church Committee. This came out in the mid-70s. The committee made a report that found that some earlier stories that charged that the CIA had cultivated relationships with private institutions, including the press, were indeed true. They actually found 50 journalists who had a secret but official relationship with the CIA. In 1977, Rolling Stone published an article called CIA in the Media, in which Carl Bernstein from Woodward and Bernstein, who exposed Richard Nixon, he actually took it even further and wrote that more than 400 members of the American press had carried out assignments for the CIA, including the New York Times, publisher Arthur Hayes Sulzberger, columnist and political analyst Stuart Alsop, and Time Magazine. So New York Times, Time Magazine, all these are propaganda. He also showed that overseas branches of major U.S. news agencies had for many years served as the eyes and ears for Operation Mockingbird, which functioned to disseminate CIA propaganda throughout the domestic U.S. media. Deborah Davis wrote a book called Catherine the Great, which was about Katharine Graham, who owned the Washington Post. She said that the CIA ran an Operation Mockingbird plot during this time, writing that the International Organization of Journalists received money and controlled reporters on every major newspaper in Europe. So the U.S. recruited leading American journalists to try to counter what they viewed as communist propaganda and influenced the operation of many, many media organizations. We also saw people like the National Student Association, which also received funding from the CIA. A lot of people don't know the feminist movement. People like Gloria Steinem. Gloria Steinem literally worked for the CIA. I've talked about this on this show before. Gloria Steinem worked for the CIA. And she made it a legitimate point to try to radicalize black women against black men. A lot of people think that she wrote the book by Michelle Wallace talking about how terrible black men are, to try to cause a schism within our community. So again, this is how deep this stuff goes. Philip Graham, who was a publisher in the Washington Post, was also a key figure recruited by the CIA to run Mockingbird within the industry. So you see all these different outlets, the New York Times, the Washington Post, Time Magazine, Newsweek is another entity. CBS was accused of having journalists on the CIA payroll. ABC, NBC, the Associated Press, United Press International, Reuters, Hearst Newspapers, Scripps Howard. So many of these different entities had CIA journalists, basically CIA owned or controlled journalists. They also had front organizations. They funneled money through groups like the National Student Organization, which we talked about, to influence the cultural organizations. And so that's why it's important, folks. Again, whenever we're talking about anything, when we're talking about elections, when we're talking about these wars, Ukraine. Oh, Vladimir Putin just woke up one day and decided he was going to invade Ukraine. That's complete nonsense. That's complete nonsense. Vladimir Putin went to Bill Clinton 25 years ago to try to be a part of NATO. Bill Clinton, who was the president at the time, said, I don't know about that. And Putin's like, well, you say that the point of NATO isn't to scheme on Russia, then let us in. What's the problem? I don't know about that. But at that point, Bill Clinton had already started encircling Russia in Eastern Europe after our government said it would not expand NATO any further. But we did. We lied. We lied. Madeleine Albright and those types of people continued to push for NATO expansion because the goal always was to encircle Russia and eventually overthrow Russia, destabilize Russia, break up Russia, the same way we've broken up Iraq and Afghanistan, these types of countries, disrupt and destabilize them so we can take their resources. Because we always saw them as a threat. And so over the last 25 years, Vladimir Putin has steadily reached out to the United States and said, what are you guys doing? We had a deal when the Berlin Wall fell and when the Warsaw Pact ended, the Soviet Union ended, you guys were not going to continue to move NATO eastward. And you keep doing it. He went to George W. Bush in 2007 and said, look, it's been over a decade now. You guys keep infringing on us. I can't let you encircle us because obviously you guys are scheming on us. So if you keep invading, then I will have to invade Ukraine and Georgia. And then in 2014, we overthrew Ukraine's government. Replaced them with a Western puppet. And that's when the Ukrainian government started bombing and killing thousands of Russian-speaking people in the Donbass region. In eastern Russia, in eastern Ukraine. It took Vladimir Putin 8 years to fully invade Ukraine in 2022 after that. But if you listen to the media, you would think Vladimir Putin just woke up one day, had his cornflakes, and decided to invade Ukraine. It's the same thing what's going on now with Israel. All the same entities that said, oh man, Russia has to be banned from all forms of the global economy. Their athletes can't represent Russia in the Olympics. Like even in boxing, for a long time, they wouldn't let two Russian fighters fight for the undisputed championship after Russia invaded Ukraine. But meanwhile, Israel's committing the worst genocide in modern history. Nothing. And not only that, the media is mostly silent on most of it. This is what we talk about propaganda, folks. This is what we talk about propaganda, folks. When we do it, it is covered one way. When they do it, it's covered another way. And so that's why it is important. It is extremely important to be vigilant about the type of news coverage that you are ingesting. ABC, CBS, NBC, all of that is propaganda. Pure propaganda, State Department influenced, billionaire corporate owned media propaganda. That is all it is. Our media has two purposes: manufacture consent for wars and manufacture consent for the corporate state to take more of our rights and to accumulate more wealth away from us. That's it. All right, folks. When we come back, we're going to get into another very serious topic that I'm sure nobody really likes to talk about, but domestic violence. It's very important to talk about these topics. It really is. I hope you stick around. Please stay with us here on WLTH, the Region's Choice, the People's Voice. We'll be right back after these.